So I've been wanting to do a video on this for days and I just haven't had time because I've had a bunch of other stuff going on. I want to do a video with what happened last Saturday at Bound for Glory when Impact Wrestling announced at the very end of the show that they were going to once again for the fourth time rebrand the company as TNA Wrestling. Now, I know TNA Wrestling very well because I went to many TNA Wrestling pay-per-views. Back when they were in Orlando at Universal Studios, I attended, I believe, 12 or 13 pay-per-views. Yeah, actually, it might be like 15. It was a lot over in Orlando. It's about an hour away from where I live. And I went over there, and so I was there. I was in the building for Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle 1, 2, 3, and 4. I was in the building for Christian versus Samoa Joe for the first Elevation X. I was there for a lot of these great shows. I mean, the booking was kind of questionable back then. It was this sort of weird mix of like Dutch Mantel and Vince Russo and Jeff Jarrett, where you had like some Russo-rific stuff on the show, but you had like Dutch doing more of like the classic stuff. He also booked the women. You know, before the women's revolution happened, where wrestling became all about like respectable female athletes, companies like Shimmer and of course TNA had the Knockouts division, and they were promoted for the most part as being more athletically driven product when it comes to women than WWE, who was still at the time doing divas and bringing in women more so for their looks as opposed to their athleticism. TNA was ahead of that. TNA also was one of the companies that made light heavyweights world champions. I mean, look at WCW. Obviously, WCW was the company that put the cruiserweights on the map as far as being a very important draw for the shows. But TNA was the first company to take a cruiserweight smaller guy and make him world champion with AJ Styles. And AJ was like the definitive TNA guy. Like, if you're going to think about who represented TNA for an entire decade, 2002 to 2013, it was AJ Styles. He won the world title multiple times. He won every title. He was oftentimes promoted as being their homegrown guy, and look what he's done in WWE. But TNA is where most of the wrestling audience found him. I have a lot of fond memories of TNA, and interestingly enough, when I was watching, what happened was on Saturday, I'm going to get to what I was going to say in a minute, my friend had come over with his family. We were watching Collision, and then Battle of the Belts was about to come on. And that's one of the worst book shows Tony Khan's ever done because it was literally jobber matches for titles. Samoa Joe against Tony Nese, a guy who on the first episode of Collision was a jobber, literally a jobber. I respect Tony Nese as a wrestler, but he's literally a jobber. Why would anybody want to see random title shots from guys who don't deserve it, who you know are going to lose? That was the entirety of Battle of the Belts, and none of the Battle of the Belts shows have meant a damn thing besides the first one and maybe the second one. They're literally filler shows. You might as well call it Dark Elevation. So we decided, let's watch Bound for Glory. So we skipped over to the pay-per-view channel, and we watched the main event between Josh Alexander and Alex Shelley for the Impact World title. And after that, they had this weird vignette where they were all in the forest, and they had this mystery box they were going to open up, and they're alluding to what's in the box. And my friend pretty funnily said, is this like the end of Hereditary? Which, if you've seen the movie, you get the joke. If you haven't seen the movie, you won't. But what happened was they revealed by showing old footage and with a promo for next year that starting in January with TNA's next pay-per-view, which I think was Hard to Kill, it's going to go back to being TNA Wrestling. So the Impact Wrestling name is only going to be the name of the TV show, TNA Impact Wrestling. Now they're going to go with TNA Wrestling. Now, when you look into this, there have been some interviews that have come out about it. And it's funny because when it happened, I told my friend, like, who could really care about this? And it's true. Like, this company went from being NWA TNA to TNA Wrestling to later on Impact Wrestling. And then it became Global Force Wrestling for a time, back to Impact. I don't even know. I might have that all mixed up. But the thing with TNA, Total Nonstop Action, it was obviously supposed to be a pun on, like, you know, what the sexual TNA means. But the whole pun was Total Nonstop Action. Now, the name is cheesy. TNA Wrestling. It's kind of a cheesy idea. And over time, starting with the Anthem purchase of the company, they chose to make it more focused on Impact Wrestling, which was the name of the show, Impact. And for a while, that was okay. Now, the biggest problem with Impact Wrestling with TNA is the creation of AEW, because for a long time, Impact Wrestling was the number two brand, the challenger brand, as they say to WWE. Now, one time, right before AEW started, Ring of Honor was kind of really on its way up there, and I'm not including Japan or Mexico, and Ring of Honor kind of sort of became number two. But when AEW started with their big TV deal and their major stars they got from WWE and guys they got from New Japan and Ring of Honor and even some guys from Impact, it pretty much just became the number two. Like, AEW is without question number two. Impact, you could say, is number three. And when I say AEW, I'm also including Ring of Honor because the Khan family owns both. So they both kind of go together. Not including, of course, International. TNA is at best number three. And I know some fans, including myself in some cases, that would consider GCW number three. Because GCW is one of the only companies besides WWE that's making a profit. AEW has been in the red from the very beginning. If you look into like what's really going on with AEW, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure Tony Khan knew when he when he created AEW with the Elite that they were going to lose money for a while because wrestling companies are expensive and they were giving out these huge contracts. John Moxley, Jericho, Punk, massive multi-million-dollar deals. They were giving out top money. Impact wasn't trying to spend that much. You understand what I'm saying? They brought in some guys, but they weren't like being helped out by Spike TV. They really weren't getting the kind of financial backing that the Khan family has for AEW. So AEW became the number two brand and still is. Impact kind of became less important. I'll be honest, I don't watch Impact. I haven't watched it in years. I watched some of the matches throughout the years and some of the shows, but it's maybe like 3 shows a year. You know what I mean? Some of the pay-per-views, and that's it. It's just we already have AEW. We've already got a competitor to WWE, and WWE's gotten really good this year. So, and last year. So Impact almost becomes a non-issue, a non-player. So them changing their name to TNA Wrestling, I don't think it's going to matter. Scott D'Amore said in an interview that the reason why they went back to TNA Wrestling is because they kept hearing fans chant TNA, TNA in all their shows. And even though they rebranded as Impact Wrestling, people still have fond memories of TNA. People still remember Sting, Kurt Angle, Christian, Kevin Nash, Booker T, Scott Steiner, these Monday Night War era wrestlers being a part of TNA. They still remember AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Petey Williams, Eric Young, who's still there, Kazarian, who's still there now. All these guys were sort of like the young blood, the homegrown TNA guys. Bobby Roode, another one. There's so many of them. Guys that really made their name in TNA. So fans do have fond memories of TNA. Regardless of some of the crap booking, TNA became a meme after a while. I think this is their idea of having a fresh start. I'm just not sure if it's going to work. I'll be honest. I don't think changing their name to TNA Wrestling is really going to give them that many new eyeballs because there's just too much wrestling on TV. 3 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Wednesday. Then Impact has their 2 hours on Thursdays usually. Friday you got another 3 hours with SmackDown and Rampage. I don't even watch Rampage anymore. Saturday you've got Collision and you've got pay-per-views depending on what day of the month it is. Or Sunday you might have pay-per-views. We're literally in an era where you have wrestling on TV sometimes 7 days a week. Sometimes 6. Depends on the week. So for Impact, they have their group of fans, but I imagine that a lot of them are either really disgusted by the way that AEW and WWE do things, and they just stick with TNA for whatever reason, whatever their reasons are, or they have a lot of time on their hands. I am busy. I run 3 different businesses. I love pro wrestling. I love it. But on my free time, if I'm going to watch wrestling, it's probably going to be WWE, AEW, or something from the past. I'm not going to invest in Impact. I don't know if my brain can handle a third company. And you're talking to somebody who at one time in the 90s watched WWF, WCW, and ECW, but now we're all adults. Now we got families. Now we got jobs. It's easier to do when you're a kid. And I just feel like there's way too much in the market right now for it to really matter. And I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't have done this. I'm not trying to say that it wasn't a good business move or that I don't understand why they did it. It's just I don't think it's going to matter because they're a distant number 3 and I just don't think it's going to bring in a new audience. And honestly, it's kind of a risk because what's going to happen if somebody hears, oh, TNA Wrestling, and they think back to all the crap that they did throughout the years? What if somebody associates TNA Wrestling with all the negative? Yeah, their fans associate it with these positive memories and these great matches. But what if there's people who associate it with it being a goofy, lowbrow, joke of a company that it was for a little while there? Or they associate it with the Carter family, who, they saved TNA while also later on kind of burying it by making bad decisions. I think Anthem is a better leader for TNA, but I feel like the existence of AEW, especially now that in this year they added Collision, that's another 2-hour show, I just don't think it's going to matter. I'm just being honest with you. I'm sure some of you guys will agree. If you're a hardcore Impact fan, dude, I used to watch TNA every Thursday when it was 1 hour, then 2 hours. It's just, it's too much wrestling. And they have some good guys there. I love PCO. I love Josh Alexander. I love Shelly and Sabre, the Motor City Machine Guns. They have some good knockouts. They've got some talent. It's just too much wrestling. And those are my thoughts.